Welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm Tammy Takaishi, a board-certified music therapist. Join me each week as a new guest from across the fine and creative arts spheres shares struggles, triumphs, laughs, words of wisdom, and more in authentic, thought-provoking, and inspiring interviews. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. Today I'm here with Eleanor Lerman. She has a career that has spanned over 50 years and has published numerous award-winning collections of poetry, short stories, and novels. One of the youngest people ever to have been named a finalist for the National Book Award in Poetry. She also won the inaugural Juniper Prize from the University of Massachusetts Press and the Leonard Marshall Poetry Prize from the American Academy of Poets, among other accolades. Her latest book of poetry, Oleander Marriage Poems, comes out in paperback September of 2025, and you can check the show notes to learn more about her, as well as purchasing her books and lots of other things, and supporting poets. Poetry is very, very important, a wonderful aspect of the arts of writing, and I'm always delighted to have poets on the show. So hello and welcome.
Hey, glad to be here.
I'd like to get started with who or what inspired you to go into writing, and then specifically poetry.
It's very easy. It was Leonard Cohen. When I was 15 or so, I was living in a very chaotic household, and I was writing, but, I didn't really know what I was doing. And this is fate. In school, they read you like Robert Browning, and it meant nothing. But it happened that I went into this little beach town where I lived one day, and they used to have in the drugstore, there was a rack of books in the front. And I only knew Leonard Cohen because this was back in the 60s. He had a song on the radio called Suzanne. So I knew Suzanne. But I'm twirling around this rack of books, and I see a book of poetry called Spice Box of Earth by Leonard Cohen. Had no idea he was a poet. So I bought it. I think it was probably $1.50 in those days. And I had to take a bus to get home. It was maybe a 20-minute bus ride. By the time I got home, I knew what I was going to do with my life. Because reading his book, something hit me. I get it. I can do this. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It was as clear to me as if, God had spoken. So that's how it started.
Did you go on to be inspired by other works of his?
Yes, I have. Behind me is a bookshelf, and I think I have everything he's ever written. There were a couple of other poets who meant a lot to me, James Tate, people like that, but it was all sort of the same kind of work. It was as if they were speaking. There was nothing very complicated about it. It was deep, complicated feelings, but the language was accessible. And I think that was the most important thing, was that they were writing in language as if you could speak that way. That's what really made a difference to me.
I'd love to talk about the difference between your very first book of poetry, how you felt about it, your creative process, and your latest, which is the 8th collection of poetry so far.
Well, the first book of poetry, I wrote it when I was about 21. I think it was published when I was 22, 23. I'm 73 now. So big difference. The first book, which was called Armed Love, was written out of rage. I was a very angry, crazy, young woman. I had left home when I was 18. I was living in the village by myself on Charles Street. And I can remember sitting on the couch that I had dragged in from the street in this little apartment, enraged, writing. I had this, yellow pad, writing on this yellow pad. So that's where that book came from. And the funny story about that is that it was reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. And it said that if books of poetry were given a rating, Ms. Lerman's, I don't know if they used Ms. then, but say Miss Lerman's book would have deserved a double X, as if there was something salacious about it. I just think nobody yet was used to a young woman writing about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it seemed, very strange to them. I've read it since. I think the worst thing that I said in there was that vampires are happier when they're homosexual. And I must have been very prescient because now, everything on TV is vampires. All right. So when I was young, the book was out of rage. I'm much older now, and it's much more now about memory and looking back at things and trying to assess your life, assess a very long marriage. I have a lifelong relationship with my brother. That's been both very important to both of us. So all of that, I think, is what's in this book. And grief. It's also a lot about grief.
Do you find that you have common threads or themes throughout all of your poetry?
It's going to sound odd to say, but yeah, I think it's humor. In the most angry sounding or saddest poems that I write, I think there's also something funny there. I think we got that from both of us, my brother and I think we got that from my father, who wanted to be a comedian and a vaudeville performer. So I think a little bit of that has seeped into, no matter how serious I try to be, some joke always comes out. So there's that.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your creative process? Are you the kind of person, just like you said, you're just sort of writing in a creative fit, or is it piece by piece, or does it just really depend on what is happening in the moment?
I'm actually very disciplined. Even when I was younger, when I was writing out of anger, the fuel was anger. I was very disciplined about, I'm going to do this every day. Can't be every single day because life interferes, but almost every day. It used to be in the evening. Now it's in the morning, but I always work. A lot of it, even though it's very disciplined, it's almost like it's automatic writing, because I write in two genres. I write poetry and I write fiction. If it's poetry, it's almost as if I'm collecting words in my head or phrases. And from some word or some phrase that appeals to me for some reason, I can build a whole poem around it. So I've always got this little mental box of words or phrases or thoughts, and I'll sit down with that, and that's how I begin writing. So even though it sounds like it might be something that's chaotic or seems very creative in a sort of wild way, it's actually extremely disciplined.
What's something about the creative process that you relish?
It's that it's so private. This is a part of my life that no matter how close I am with anyone else in my life, this is mine. It's mine alone. It's always been mine all my life. And it's like a secret I have with myself. And it's important that the people who I care about, or the person I live with, understand that, because it's not, they see the end product of it because they see the books, but everything that goes before that is private. And that's very important to me. It's the conversation I've had with myself over all these years. And I love that it's just mine. It just belongs to me.
That sounds very special.
It is.
It also sounds like, and I mean, this seems pretty obvious, especially coming from me, a fellow poet and creative, but it's like putting your heart on a plate, just being so vulnerable.
That's interesting because I think in my outside life, I'm very protected against that. But in my writing, I don't mind that at all. I'm happy to do that. But I still think that everything that I share as a writer is still only part of what goes on. I mean, that's what all humans have to themselves, is that there's always part of themselves that no one will ever know. Even if you try to share it, you can't. It's so private. So it doesn't bother me in the least to be talking about what's really closest, I think closest to me, because in truth, it's not. It's just part of what is. I couldn't even begin to find words, I think, for the rest of it. That will always stay inside privately.
What is a piece of writing advice that you ignore, whether it's on purpose or accidentally?
Well, that's a very good question. I never went to college. I never took a writing class. I never let anyone teach me anything. I never listened to anything anyone ever said to me about writing. So, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the best way or the only way to do it, but it just never occurred to me that anybody, I guess that's very, it's very prideful of me, but it never occurred to me that anybody could explain anything to me because I was so driven to do this. I always felt that I knew what I was doing. Now, I look back on some of my, really earlier work, and I can see now how clumsy it was. I think it succeeded because it had a lot of power to it. I've taught myself over all these years. So I think that's what I always ignored was you need to go to school. Somebody needs to teach you. Somebody needs to help you. No, they don't. But I wouldn't advise that. That was just the way I did it.
Yeah, I definitely agree that if school is right for someone, great. If it's not, that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with finding your own creative path and
Mm,
following a spark. And sometimes some of the best musicians never had lessons, you know?
right. Exactly. It's just there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about the creation, you know. People can learn so much from life, from the world, from traveling, from relationships, heartache, you know,
Well,
joys.
that's exactly true because since I had left home so early and I was completely on my own, I had to teach myself everything. I didn't know anything. I was very young when my mother died, and I remember being in a store looking to buy underwear, and I had no idea what size underwear. I had no ideas. And I remember having to ask some woman there, I was maybe 12, and some nice woman helped me. But I was 18 and when I, left home, and I still knew very little about anything. So I had to learn everything by myself. And I think that also gave me the strength to think, well, I can write if I have to figure out everything else, including how to pay my rent and, heat a can of soup. Well, then I can write. So it was all, yeah, it's all life experience. It was all part of that.
Can you speak a little more to how you're growing up and essentially being shoved into having to be resilient affected your creativity?
My brother and I, again, I'll probably bring him up a lot. We've had this conversation. This conversation has continued over 50 years because my mother died when I was young. I was 12, I think he was 8. And because we had to learn everything for ourselves, because after my mother died, my father married someone who brought a lot of mental illness into the household, and everything was very chaotic. So I again, it goes back to teaching myself because I had to learn to do everything myself. Let me digress for a minute. He and I have talked about that. He took one path. He's a journalist. His way of looking at the world was very outward. It was to see what's going on and to report on things and to take things apart and see how they worked and to find the truth of things. And mine was to sit in a room and pull myself apart. I was lucky in that I had him as a witness over all these years so that the two of us could talk to each other about how the chaos in our childhood sent us off into the world almost as two halves, because he looks at the world one way and I look at it a very different way. Over all these years, we've been able to have this conversation about how the chaos and danger actually in our childhood and the break from an idyllic childhood into a very kind of dangerous, crazy life affected both of us. And it brought about in both of us a creative process, but it's interesting how they are almost polar opposites of each other. He dealt with the chaos one way, I think, as a way of controlling his environment. And I dealt with it another way of, I'm going to sit in this room and hide, and I'm going to tell you, the world, what I think is going on. It's been interesting to see that effect and to have a witness with me on this whole journey because we've been able to discuss how that all happened.
That is great that you did have a teammate there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Because otherwise, I think it would have been, I wouldn't have had anyone to say, "Did this really happen? I'm not making this up. It really was that crazy, right?" And yes, it really was that crazy. So it helped.
I know that you throw your whole self into writing, but are there any other creative acts that you do just for fun?
No, I, I, I mean, there's like three things in my life. I write, I read, and I watch television. But reading and television to me are work because I like to be told stories. So being told stories is all for me. I'm getting information, I'm getting ideas, I'm getting words that I might use. So those three things, as a matter of fact, My wife complains about this endlessly. That's the loop of my life. She'll tell you she writes, she reads, and she watches TV. And if I want to get her out of the house, I have to make a whole thing of it. But it's true. There's nothing else really that I do. I don't want to go on vacations. I I'm a very otherwise I think probably a very boring and difficult person to live with because it's like close the shades, turn on the TV, and I'll be fine. You go do whatever you wanted. Come back and tell me what the weather was.
I am curious now, what are some books and shows that really captivate you? Could be long time ones or even recent ones.
I just found Tessa Hadley, who's a British writer, and her work is gorgeous. So, I mean, that's really been helpful for me to see how she writes and how she uses language. I actually recently went back to another poet who I used to, I mean, along with Leonard Cohen, someone I really loved, and that was Richard Brautigan. His work has been important to me. I actually just finished watching Department Q on Netflix, which I recommend to everyone. That was wonderful. And I was watching last night, I finished watching Bosch. I like mysteries, police procedurals and things like that. But pretty much you can put me in front of the TV, turn it on, and whatever's there, I'll watch it. Other than, reality shows, but anything else, I'm fine.
How did New York City impact your creative process?
It's everything. It's part of everything because I grew up in the Bronx. And later, when I was a teenager, we moved to Rockaway. And when I say Rockaway, people now think of surfers and taco shops. But when I lived in Rockaway, it was a deserted, dark peninsula that it was hard to get on and off of. I went to high school with a lot of, everybody was high. That's what we did. We got stoned and then went into the classes. But again, when I was 18, I moved to the village, and the city was my teacher. I wandered everywhere. I went to gay clubs, I went to straight clubs, no one will remember this, but there was a place called the Electric Circus on St. Mark's Place. That was a wonderful place. I went there. I went to, where Andy Warhol was. I went everywhere and I watched. I was in New York when in 1970, I was 18. So on West 4th Street, there were still the coffee shops where the Love and Spoonful was. And so that whole Summer of Love thing, I was there for that. I was there for now I'm watching this again, the Vietnam War protests. I went to all of that. So the city was everything to me. It was, if the rest of the world didn't exist, it didn't matter to me. The city taught me everything I needed to know. It taught me how to exist. It taught me how to get a job. It taught me how to work. It taught me how to dress. It taught me everything. So New York City is, I think, in everything I've ever written. As a matter of fact, the last book of short stories I wrote was about COVID time in New York City. And the next book of short stories that's going to come out in 2026, which is called King the Wonder Dog and Other Stories. I didn't realize it till the publisher mentioned it to me. They're all set in New York City. They're all about people and their dogs in the city. So it's the background of, I think, everything I write.
And it seems to find its way into so many creative things, like movies, books, TV shows.
Yes. And no matter how different it is over the decades, because the New York I knew when I was your age was very different than the New York City you know now, but it doesn't matter because you meet the city at the moment that you're there. And if you can handle it, because I think New York City tends to be overwhelming for some people, but if you can handle it, it loves you back and it just opens itself to you. So, and you can find whatever you need there, including the people you need.
100%.
Yeah. I was very lucky that I don't know how it happened, but the people that I needed found me and helped me all along the way.
I'd love to talk a little bit about what it was like for you to be a National Book Award finalist and also and just getting recognition in general. What does that feel like? What is that like?
I'm going to tell you what happened from the National Book Award. I was, as I said, 23. It turned into what has become a famous literary feud by accident. You know the story, Adrienne Rich, Alice Walker, and Audre Lorde were nominated at the same time. They were, older than me, and I saw them as academics. They were probably very different than I pictured them. But I saw them as successful and comfortable financially. None of it was probably true, but I was 20, I was a kid, I didn't know anything. So they started calling me on the phone in order of importance at that time. So I think probably it was Audrey first, Alice next, and then Adrienne last. The gist of it was you have to remember this was the beginning of the feminist movement. I also have to explain, I was running a harpsichord workshop. We built a company called Zuckerman Harpsichords. It was the beginning of Zuckerman Harpsichords, which is now a big fancy company, but this was the beginning of it. And so I'm running this, I'm 18, I'm managing a harpsichord workshop. We're building kit parts because for some reason people like to build harpsichords out of kits. So I'm running this place, we're building harpsichord parts, we're dragging around 150-pound cases for harpsichords. I'm living upstairs. I'm from this place. I'm paying the rent of myself. I'm managing the building I'm living in. And oh God, I'm going to get myself in trouble with every feminist. This woman calls me up. I barely know them, introduces herself as Audre Lorde and says, whoever gets the National Book Award has to turn it down because it's a patriarchal society and men are, stepping on women and blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, I have no problem with men so far. Men have helped me, as I said, every step of the way. The person who convinced me to get my books published was a man. My brother's my best friend. My problem is poets don't make any money. So if you want to make a big thing out of why don't poets make enough money to support yourself, I'll get into a fight with over this, but I'm not getting into a fight over patriarchy. So then Alice called me, then Adrienne called me, and Adrienne was very angry. She said things about, I'm young, I don't understand, blah, blah, it's a political movement. I told her the same thing. I do understand. I don't need any help from anybody, men or women. I need money. So what happens eventually is Adrienne won the National Book Award for diving into the wreck, as she should have. It was a wonderful book. And she took the money in the name of oppressed women everywhere, which I thought was okay. Fine. It's turned into every time a biography of one of these women is written, there's a footnote. Eleanor Lerman turned down getting involved in this political process because she wasn't interested in politics, which is not true. I was out there marching against the Vietnam War day and night. I wasn't interested in, getting into a thing about patriarchy because to me it was a more complex issue and blah, blah. So that's what came to me out of the National Book Award nomination. I got involved in a literary feud with women who were older, more experienced than me, knew more what they were doing, but I wasn't going to give in. But what I did learn over time about the National Book Award, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Fellowship, you think they're going to change your life. They don't. The only thing that's going to change your life is you. If I wanted to have a more public life, I would have made myself do that a long time ago. I never wanted to. And so I didn't do anything to make myself more of a public figure. So what these awards do, I guess, and to be honest, I'm sure at the time it gave me some sort of validation. But if you're a neurotic Jew, as I am, nothing's going to help. You could give me every award in the world and nothing's going to convince me that I'm really, really what I say I am, that I'm a writer. I've been in therapy for 10 years talking about the fact that I don't really feel like what I say I am, so I know that I'm good at what I do, but what you think about yourself as an artist is really a conversation that goes on with yourself. So the awards are helpful in that for a few minutes, they make you feel like you're a big deal, but by the next morning, you're still back to being the same neurotic person you always were and to make yourself work. So yes, you should try and get awards. Yes, it's a great validation, but it really doesn't change anything. It gave me a little bit of money at a time when I could have used the money, but that was, So finally, yes, see, it was valid. I finally got the $1,000 that I was arguing with them about the National Book Award, which I think what was the prize at that time. I think it was $1,000.
I really love that you shared such an interesting story that I knew nothing about, and your insights about that. And I think that your advice about just being yourself and doing what you do is so important. Winning stuff, it's nice, but it doesn't make the work easier.
No, it does nothing. The only person that can keep you going is you.
Mm-hmm.
And, your own neuroses and the things that make you feel good or bad about yourself, those are the things you have to have conversations with yourself about. Nothing, no, nothing's going to make any difference. No amount of money or awards. How many times you see actors who have paid millions of dollars sitting there telling you, I don't know, I don't think I'm so great, and I don't think I'm very pretty either. So,
Yeah.
by the way, if you want to read a good book, Hillary Holiday wrote a biography of Adrienne Rich. And she was the first person who ever called me and said, what really happened? So I told her the story. And it's very well, it's a wonderful book. Adrienne deserves having a biography because she was an important figure in the feminist movement, not just someone who was very nice to me, but I didn't much care at the time.
What is one of the most recent books that you've read that really sparked you in some way?
Well, I mentioned Tessa Hadley, Roxanne Robinson, who's another, I think she's British, another writer. When I find a writer that I like, I'll usually read everything of theirs. I just actually went back and was reading Edith Wharton again. It's something I never thought I would like, but I've always, I think every 10, 15 years or so, I reread The House of Mirth. The writing is lovely, and it's very rich. What am I reading now? Oh, I'm reading Anthony Horowitz's books, Moonflower Murders, and I forget the name of the first one, but Anthony Horowitz is his whole series of murder mysteries, but they're very literary, starring Atticus Punt, I think is the way you pronounce it, as a detective. Those are wonderful, beautifully written.
What across your career is the one thing that you've learned the most, like the biggest lesson?
It's that you have to be able to just draw on yourself. You have to, in the darkest moments of your career when you think there's no point in doing this and nobody's publishing anything I'm writing and nobody's paying any attention, you have to do it anyway. Out of that, I think what I've learned is, as I'm older, I'm doing this now completely for myself. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. And I still want to get books published, but if I didn't, I probably would be okay with that because I'm doing it because I love it. I have to do it. I discard a lot of what I write because it turns out it wasn't as good as I thought it was. I have actually published a couple of novels, but I once wrote a whole novel. When I got to the end of it, I thought, okay, I enjoyed doing that, but it's awful. So I just put it away. And that's also very important. You have to be able to be honest with yourself and discard what is not up to your own standards. But all of that said, in the end, you have to be doing it for yourself, for nothing else, not for anyone else, not as a tribute to anyone else, not for any other reason. You're doing it because you enjoy it. It's something you're giving yourself, you're doing with yourself alone. And that's what I meant by it belongs to me. So I decide what I do with it. No one can decide for me. Nobody can tell me what to do with it. It's my work. It's mine. That's the most important thing. If you're alone in a garret somewhere and nobody's paying any attention, you have to do it anyway because you enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. How has your life in the creative arts been different than you imagined it would?
I think that I thought when I was younger, something I touched on earlier, which is that it was, if I could become well known, somehow I'd have a much more interesting life. Apparently, the truth is I wasn't all that interested in having a very interesting life because I actually did when I was younger, when I was living in the village, through no skill of my own. I was in the middle of a circle of the person who convinced me to publish the first time was a neighbor who was a film producer. He died recently, was a film producer. And in the harpsichord place, there was a blackboard and I was supposed to be writing parts we needed, but I would be writing poems and he would have to walk through the harpsichord place to get his mail. And he stopped one day and said, "Who wrote that?" Reading the poem on the board. And I said, "Me." And he said, "Show me what else you've got. You need to get this published." So through him, I met a lot of artists and writers and people in the film industry. I'll tell you something, there was actually something that was not good about that for me, because I met a lot of very well-known writers, mostly men, actually, who were all extremely kind to me. But I was frightened of them because I thought, that's Donald Barthelme. That's Tom Pynchon. Tom Pynchon, who would hate me telling this story, was one of my neighbors. I didn't know who he was. And he started coming into my apartment and sitting with me at night and watching TV with me at night and eating my hostess cupcakes. And I just thought, who is this big pain in the neck bothering me every night? I didn't know he was Tom Pynchon until I figured it out one day. But by then he was still just this pain in the neck who was bothering me every night. But I was, afraid in the sense that I thought, well, I'm writing poetry. Oh, maybe to be an important writer, you have to write novels. I had no idea how to write novels. I eventually did teach myself, but I think that stopped me for a long time. I mean, like years, because I thought I had to learn to write very serious fiction, and I couldn't. So, I mean, I do write fiction. I write short stories, but I don't think they're exactly, they're not deadly serious. I'm not trying to be Philip Roth. I'm trying to be me. I did have this very interesting life, but there were aspects of it that weren't good for me. And so then I got married, and I married a musician, and we thought, oh, we'll go to live in Queens. He'll go work for Con Ed and we'll be normal people. We were idiots because we thought we weren't normal people, but we were going to try and be normal people. So that didn't work. So, long and short of it is, I ended up who I was always meant to be, myself, sitting in a room by myself, writing what I wanted to write for me to enjoy it. So this very interesting life that I always thought my work was going to bring me, I had a chance to have it. I didn't like it, apparently. And so I ended up where I was supposed to end up.
That's a really beautiful story. I feel like no matter where our lives take us, the twists, the turns, the things we don't expect, I think we always end up where we're meant to be.
I think that's probably true, especially for an artist, because if you're serious about your work and you keep at it, your work takes you where you need to be. And, you learn to almost to be a partner with your own work. It's like this second self that lives with you. When I didn't work, really, my brothers helped me a lot because he was producing, of all things, America's Most Wanted at the time. And he was writing books that came out of that. And he kept pushing me to work because he had me writing stuff for him. But when I didn't work for a very long time, I didn't write poetry or fiction. That was the idiot stage when we were trying to be normal people. When it came back to me, which is another long story I won't go into, I felt like it had waited me out. It had been sitting there inside, waiting for me to realize, you can't get away from me. I'm always going to be here, and someday you're going to come back. And that's what happened.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really does.
Good.
Would you like to read any of your poems for the audience?
What I want to read you is a poem called Grief. It has to do a lot with what I was talking to you about, my mother's death, and also, my brother being with me. And it involves Godzilla, because when my brother and I were little, we used to watch something called The $1,000,000 Movie, which was on 5 nights a week on Channel 9 in the city. And the movie, so 5 nights a week we could watch Godzilla. And I always felt very bad for him because I was wondering, I thought, my gosh, here is this poor guy. You wake him up after 1,000,000 years and you don't understand why why he's mad at you, why he's destroying Tokyo. Okay, here's grief. Grief. What approaches in the night, the endless night? Not monsters. They are old friends from a flickering screen. Tokyo dies again. The nuclear monster stomps back into the sea, and I want to know where he has gone. Where is he now? Then a woman dies in 1964 with only her cousin to hold her hand. Lillian, that was the woman's name. My father is somewhere screaming. Where's my brother? Where am I? Now a cat is yowling in the night. Now I feel the absence of my dog. Decades march on, and I still don't know how to recover. God, I'm old now, and I still wonder, where is she? If her ghost would appear, I would learn to talk to a ghost. Instead, I live in a dark house, a lonely house with a lonely wind coming wild through the windows. She left in winter, but I remember spring, sitting at the kitchen table, a strawberry pattern on the oilcloth. Did she love me? Who can be sure this far away in time? And the cat is still yowling in the night. It never stops. I can go on writing this forever, but it won't help. Sunny days won't help. They are disfigured. Even my body is disfigured, or so it seems to me. I don't look like myself anymore, and of course that makes it worse. She was younger than I am now, and the cat is still yowling. Mourning doesn't help. Grief was anger once, but now it's only what it is, what it does, and it is still approaching, sitting beside me. Lillian, it says, and the nuclear monster howls from the depth of the sea. It had a mother once. It knows. So that was sort of everything I talked to you about. That was my mother, my brother, my father, and grief and growing older. And looking back at all these, how did I survive all this stuff? I did, and I'm fine. Except I still need my therapist, but I'm fine.
Oh, that was really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I lost my mom early. Not that early, but early, and my father a couple of years ago. So it really, no pun intended, really hits home.
Yeah, so you know. Yeah.
And I love the way that you encapsulate that with early memories and that searching. I feel like that's always there.
Yeah, she's always around, and as I said, my brother and I, 50 years we've been talking about that. Where is she? Whenever I had a pet die, you'd have to take it to the vet, and it's very sad, but I would always say to the pet, there's going to be a light. Look into the light and go to my mother. My mother will be on the other side of the light. And my brother, with his great Jewish humor, says, what are you doing? You know she hated animals. She's going to be waiting for you with all these animals, and she's going to be very angry at you. So it turned into a wonderful joke.
Well, thank you so much, Eleanor, for being on the show, for
Thank you for
sharing your
having
stories,
me.
sharing your beautiful poem. Listeners, please check the show notes again to purchase her other books, to buy her book, Oleander Marriage. But before we go, I would love to know, what is one of your favorite comfort meals?
It's something my mother used to make, which is simply mashed potatoes with ground beef. She called it mush. I'm sure it had something to do with the end of the month and not there being a lot of money around, but I thought it was delicious. I still eat it. And the other person here who lives with me says, how can you eat that? I think it's delicious.
It sounds tasty. I'm a fan of meat and potatoes. Who can go wrong, right?
Nah, you mush it all together and it's wonderful. And the best thing about it is you can put it in a bowl and sit in front of the television. It's heaven.
There you go. Well, listeners, again, please check the show notes. Eleanor, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And as always, keep listening, keep creating.
Thanks for listening to Creative Piecemeal. We hope today's episode left you feeling inspired. This podcast is independently created and produced by the host, Tammy Takaishi. More details about today's guest can be found in the show notes, along with links to the podcast's socials, merch store, and ways to support arts organizations AHA Broadway and New Normal Rep, both near and dear to Tammy's heart. Don't forget to visit creativepiecemeal.com, the official podcast website, where you can leave fan mail, write a review, explore Tammy's blog, and discover the growing collection of episodes. Special thanks to our audio engineer, Alex Rapetti. Additional narration by Dante Jace. Let's keep celebrating creativity in all its forms.